There is a glass of wine at the end of some evenings that feels less like a drink and more like permission to finally let the day go. For a long while it seems to keep that promise. The warmth spreads, the shoulders drop, the mind stops circling, and sleep arrives faster than it has any right to. Sleep medicine has a gentler name for that warmth than the one you may have given it, and it is not the same thing as rest. So if the wine makes you sleepy so quickly, why do you keep waking in the dark, somewhere around 3 in the morning, with the house quiet and no reason you can name? Here is the part that rarely gets said out loud. The very thing that pulls you down so smoothly is often the same thing that lifts you back out a few hours later, right when the deepest repair was supposed to be happening. Welcome to Psychology for Sleep. Tonight moves gently through what actually unfolds in a body after that glass. The early softness, the hours that come apart in the middle of the night, the small thirst that wakes you, not to take anything away from you, and not to hand you a verdict about yourself. Let the evening settle its weight onto the bed beneath you. You're in a dim, quiet room where the day's rituals are looked at kindly. Let's follow that first sip all the way to 3 in the morning and see where it really leads. There is a particular tiredness that arrives with the last swallow of wine, a warmth behind the eyes, a loosening in the shoulders, a sense that sleep is finally close. What you feel has a mechanism, and it begins within minutes of the first sip. Alcohol is a small molecule that slips easily into the brain, and once there, it quiets the circuits that keep you alert. It nudges a calming messenger called GABA to speak louder, softening the signals that hold you awake. That heaviness is not imagined and not weakness for wanting it. So here is the question this whole night rests on. If the wine makes you this sleepy, why do you so often wake at 3 in the morning? The warmth is real and only the first half of the story. A glass of wine can make you fall asleep faster than usual, sometimes almost against your will. Researchers call this shortened sleep onset, and it is one of the most consistent findings in the study of alcohol and sleep. Alcohol acts as a sedative on the central nervous system, slowing the electrical chatter of the brain until the threshold for sleep is reached sooner. In small studies, people given a modest amount of wine before bed drift off measurably quicker than on nights without it. This is the part that feels like proof, that makes the ritual seem to work. But falling asleep quickly and sleeping well are two different things, and the difference is where the rest of the night lives. What feels like help at the door does not always stay the night. Maybe you have leaned on a glass in the evening, the way you might lean on a familiar chair, something dependable at the end of a long day. Scientists who study this call it the sedative hypnotic effect, and it is the same broad category that certain sleeping medications fall into. Alcohol depresses activity across the cortex, dulling worry, quieting the running commentary of the mind, letting the body sink. For a person carrying tension, that quieting can feel like relief arriving on schedule. There is nothing shameful in having found it. Understanding your own habit does not require you to defend it or condemn it. The point tonight is only to see clearly what the substance is actually doing, so the seeing itself can be a kind of gentleness. Perhaps you have felt the wine seem to melt the edges off an anxious evening, softening thoughts that had been sharp all day. This happens because alcohol enhances the brain's main inhibitory system while dampening its main excitatory one, tipping the balance toward calm. GABA receptors spread throughout the brain respond to alcohol by making neurons less likely to fire. At the same time, glutamate, the messenger that keeps you sharp and reactive, is quieted. The result is a chemistry that leans, briefly, towards stillness. It is easy to see why the mind reaches for it. But the brain does not simply accept this shift, it begins almost at once to push back, and that pushing back is what the deeper hours reveal. There is a feeling you may know well, sleep that comes heavy and fast, then thins out later without explanation. What you are noticing is the way alcohol changes the very architecture of the night. Sleep is not one flat state, it moves through stages: light sleep, deep slow wave sleep, and the vivid, story-making sleep called REM. Alcohol front loads the night with deep sleep and delays the dreaming kind. Early on, this can feel like unusually solid rest, sinking you into the slow, restorative depths sooner than usual. That early depth is genuine. But sleep keeps its own ledger across the whole night, and what is borrowed in the first hours tends to come due in the last. Have you ever slept beside someone after they had been drinking and heard how still and deep they seemed at first? That early stillness reflects a real rise in slow wave sleep, the deepest and most physically restorative stage during the first part of the night. In this stage, brain waves slow and lengthen, the body's repair processes run, and growth hormone is released. Alcohol tends to increase this deep sleep in the first few hours, which is part of why the initial rest can feel so complete. Researchers have measured this rise fairly consistently. Yet the same substance that deepens the early night also sets up the disruption that follows. The depth is real, and so is its cost. You might remember a night when you fell asleep easily, but woke feeling strangely unrested, as if the sleep had not fully counted. One reason is that alcohol suppresses REM sleep in the first half of the night, and REM is the stage most tied to emotional processing and memory. During REM, the brain sorts through the day's experiences, files memories, and works through feelings while the body stays still. When alcohol pushes this stage aside early on, the mind loses some of that overnight sorting. The sleep can be deep without being complete. This is a quiet theme the night keeps returning to. Quantity of sleep and quality of sleep are not the same thing, and wine tends to trade one for the other. Perhaps you have woken from a night of drinking with a head full of vivid, restless dreams toward morning. That flood of dreaming has a name, REM rebound, and it is the second half of a trade the body began earlier. Because alcohol held REM sleep back during the first hours, the brain does not simply forgive the debt. As the alcohol clears, it rushes to make up the lost dreaming later in the night. The result is a burst of intense, sometimes strange or unsettling dreams in the early morning hours. The evidence for this rebound is fairly steady across sleep studies. Your morning was not random. It was the back half of a bargain your brain struck while you slept. You may have felt your sleep grow lighter and more broken as the night went on, without ever knowing why. This is because as your body metabolizes alcohol, its calming effect fades and gives way to the opposite, a lighter, more fragmented sleep. Alcohol leaves the bloodstream at a fairly steady pace, and once it is mostly gone, the brain no longer has the sedative holding it down. What replaces the sedation is a kind of low-grade activation, nudging you toward the surface of sleep again and again. Researchers describe the second half of an alcohol-affected night as measurably more disrupted than the first. The calm you felt going to bed did not last the whole way through. It was always going to hand the night back over. Think about how strange it is that the same glass that put you to sleep so gently can be why you are staring at the ceiling hours later. Underneath everything tonight sits that quiet puzzle. If wine sedates you at bedtime, what wakes you in the dark? The answer is not a single thing but a handover. Sedation early, arousal late, the body passing you from one state to the other as the alcohol burns away. What felt like one smooth act of falling asleep is really two halves pulling in opposite directions. Seeing that shape does not undo the habit. It simply makes the 3 a.m. waking less a mystery and more a mechanism, something happening to you, not something wrong with you. You may have felt oddly alert around 3 or 4 in the morning after an evening of wine, wide awake when you least wanted to be. This is linked to a rebound in alertness that follows the sedation, sometimes described as a small surge in the body's stress response. As alcohol clears, the nervous system swings back toward activation, heart rate can tick upward, the mind sharpens, and sleep grows shallow. Studies suggest the body's own stress chemistry rises during this clearing phase, though the size of the effect varies from person to person, and the evidence is still limited. What matters is simpler than the biochemistry. The wakefulness is not a failure of will. It is the tail end of a chemical wave, cresting at the worst possible hour. Perhaps you have noticed that a night with wine leaves you more likely to get up and use the bathroom than a night without it. That is the diuretic effect, and it is one of the clearest, least disputed ways alcohol interrupts sleep. Alcohol suppresses a hormone called vasopressin, which normally tells the kidneys to hold on to water overnight. With that signal quieted, the kidneys release more fluid and the bladder fills faster than it otherwise would. So you wake, cross a cold floor, and lose your place in the night. It is a small, ordinary interruption, easy to dismiss. But each one thins the sleep a little further, and on a wine night, they tend to come more often. You might have felt thirsty in the middle of the night after drinking, a dry mouth pulling you toward waking. This thirst is the other side of the same diuretic mechanism, the body registering the fluid it has been steadily losing. As vasopressin stays suppressed and the kidneys keep working, mild dehydration sets in over the hours. The brain notices and first becomes one more small signal nudging you awake. None of this is much on its own, a little more urine, a little more thirst. But sleep is built from continuity, from long unbroken stretches, and these gentle interruptions fray the edges of that continuity. The wine that helped you sink is, quietly, the same wine helping to lift you back up. Have you ever wondered why the sleep after wine can feel oddly warm, or why you kick off the covers in the night? Alcohol widens the small blood vessels near the skin, a process called vasodilation, which makes you feel flushed and warm even as it lowers your core temperature. This matters for sleep because the body relies on a gentle drop in core temperature to move into and hold on to its deeper stages. When alcohol scrambles that temperature signal, it can interfere with the smooth descent into deep sleep later in the night. The warmth you feel is not comfort so much as confusion, your body's thermostat working against the very rest it is trying to reach. You may know the sound of your own breathing changing after a drink, or have been told your snoring gets worse. Researchers have found that alcohol relaxes the muscles of the throat and airway, which can make breathing during sleep less steady. Those relaxed tissues are more likely to vibrate, producing snoring. And in some people, they can partly collapse, briefly narrowing the airway. This can lead to shallower breathing and small dips in oxygen that pull sleep toward the surface without fully waking you. For people already prone to disrupted breathing at night, the effect can be more pronounced. It is another quiet way. The substance that relaxed you into bed keeps loosening things that sleep would rather hold firm. Perhaps you have caught your own heart beating faster than expected as you lay in bed after drinking, a flutter that seemed to come from nowhere. Alcohol can raise heart rate and slightly disturb the heart's rhythm during sleep, especially as the body processes it. The nervous system that governs the heart tips away from its restful, parasympathetic mode toward a more activated state. Even at modest amounts, Some studies show heart rate variability, a marker of restful recovery, dropping on nights with alcohol. The evidence here is growing, but still being refined. What you can hold on to is that the racing you sometimes feel is real and has a cause. It is the body working, not resting, while you lie still. Even after a full night's sleep, a wine evening can leave you groggier the next morning than the hours would suggest. This is because the sleep you got was lighter and more broken in its second half, so it delivered less true recovery than its length promised. Grogginess on waking often reflects poor sleep quality rather than simply too little sleep. When deep and REM stages are shuffled and interrupted, the brain does not complete its usual overnight maintenance, and morning arrives with a fog that coffee only partly lifts. The number of hours can look reasonable on paper. The felt experience tells a different, more honest story about what the night actually gave you. Have you ever felt that the emotional weight of a hard day seemed heavier the morning after drinking rather than lighter? Part of this may trace back to that suppressed REM sleep, since REM is where the brain does much of its overnight emotional processing. When the dreaming stage is pushed aside in the first half of the night, the mind has less time to soften the day's difficult moments, to file them somewhere less raw. The next day, feelings can sit closer to the surface. Researchers are still mapping exactly how this works, so some caution is warranted. But the pattern many people notice, that wine to unwind can leave the next day feeling more, not less, tender, is not imagination. You may have found that the more wine on a given evening, the more scrambled the night that follows, a rough dose response you can feel in your own body. Studies bear this out. Low amounts of alcohol disrupt sleep modestly, while higher amounts disrupt it substantially. A single small glass early in the evening may leave sleep architecture only slightly altered. Several glasses closer to bedtime tend to suppress REM more sharply, deepen the early sedation, and worsen the fragmentation later on. The relationship is not perfectly clean, and individual bodies vary. Still, the direction is consistent enough to trust. Knowing this is not a verdict on your choices. It is simply information you can hold lightly on the nights you choose to. Perhaps you felt that timing matters, that a glass with dinner sits differently than a glass right before bed. Sleep researchers have found the same thing. The closer to sleep you drink, the more alcohol is still in your system during the crucial early stages. When drinking ends a few hours before bed, much of the alcohol may be metabolized before it can distort the deepest sleep. When the last glass is close to lights out, its sedation and its later disruption land squarely on the sleeping brain. The gap between drinking and sleeping shapes how much the night is affected. This is offered not as a rule to follow, but as a small, useful truth about how the body clears what you give it. You might have assumed, as many have, that because wine helps you fall asleep, it is also helping you sleep. This is one of the gentlest and most common misunderstandings about alcohol and rest, and the science quietly corrects it. Falling asleep is only the doorway. The sleep beyond the doorway is what restores you. Alcohol is genuinely good at the doorway and genuinely unreliable at everything past it. The measured result, across many studies, is faster sleep onset paired with worse sleep quality overall. Holding both halves of that truth at once is the honest position. The wine did help you in one narrow way, and that narrow help is easy to mistake for the whole. You may have wondered whether the comfort of a bedtime glass is coming from the wine itself or from the ritual around it. This is a fair and searching question, and the honest answer is that much of the comfort may be the ritual, the pause, the warmth, the signal to the body that the day is ending. Expectation shapes experience powerfully. believing something will relax, you can, on its own, help you relax. Researchers who study this suggest the felt calm often owes as much to routine and belief as to the substance's chemistry. This does not make your comfort false. It means the soothing you feel might be reachable through the ritual alone, with less of the cost that lands in the darker hours. Perhaps you have noticed that wine seems to affect your sleep more now than it did years ago, the sane glass landing harder. This is not your imagination. The body's ability to process alcohol and to buffer its effects on sleep tends to change with age. Older adults often metabolize alcohol more slowly and sleep more likely to begin with, so the disruption stacks on an already fragile foundation. Deep sleep naturally thins across the decades, and alcohol's interference has less margin to work against. The effect that once felt minor can grow more noticeable over time. There is no judgment in this, only recognition. The body you drink in tonight is not the body you drank in a decade ago, and it keeps a different ledger. You might have felt the difference between wine that helps you unwind and wine that becomes the only way you can wind down. This is where a gentle line lives, and it is worth naming without alarm. When sleep starts to depend on alcohol, the brain can adapt, needing the substance to reach the same sedation and sleeping worse without it. This is how a soothing habit can slowly tighten into a reliance. The evidence here is well established, though every person's path is their own. Noticing where you sit on this is not a cause for shame. It is a form of self-knowledge, the kind that lets you make choices from clarity rather than habit on whatever timeline is yours. So gather what these hours have laid out. Wine opens the door to sleep with real skill, and then, as it burns away, becomes the thing standing in the doorway. The sedation and the disruption are not two phenomena, but one substance seen at 2 points in the night, calming early, arousing late. And so the question we began with turns a little in the hand. It was never really why wine both helps and hurts. It looks more like why we reach for the help at all, and what the reaching is truly for. That deeper question, the tenderness underneath the habit, the wish to be carried gently into rest, is where the night now leans. The comfort you have been seeking is real. Where it actually lives is what we follow from here. Notice how your own breath has slowed while these hours drifted by, a little longer on each exhale, a little more space between one thought and the next. The handover we just traced, sedation loosening into wakefulness as the night turns, is the body's own rhythm working in the dark, needing no instruction from anyone. Right now, nothing is being metabolized against you, nothing is burning away. There is only this settling, the kind that arrives on its own when the day finally stops asking anything of you. The question we opened has started to soften. Perhaps the comfort you have been reaching for through a glass was always something the quiet itself could offer, more gently, at less cost. Let that possibility rest beside you without needing to be decided. Feel the weight of your body on the bed, held. From here, the night leans toward what that comfort is truly made of. Maybe you have noticed that the glass, which relaxes you on a quiet Tuesday, does something different on a Friday after a long week. That difference is not only in your mood, it is partly in your body's changing baseline. Researchers who track sleep across many nights find that alcohol's effect depends heavily on how tired, stressed, or rested you already are when you drink it. On a depleted night, the sedation feels stronger and the rebound later can feel rougher. Studies here are small and vary between people, so the pattern is a tendency, not a rule. Still, it helps explain why the same wine can feel like a gift one night and a thief the next. You may have poured what felt like a modest glass, and later wondered why it hit harder than expected. The reason is often the pour itself. A standard drink in the United States is about 5 fluid ounces of table wine at roughly 12% alcohol, yet a typical wine glass at home holds far more than that. Researchers studying pour sizes found people routinely serve themselves generous amounts without noticing, especially in wider glasses. So the one glass you counted may have been closer to 2 standard drinks. This matters because sleep effects tend to scale with the dose, and a bigger pour quietly moves you toward the fragmented half of the night. Perhaps you felt fine going to bed but woke groggy, as if the wine had unfinished business with you. Part of that comes from how your body clears alcohol overnight. On average, an adult processes roughly 1 standard drink per hour, though this varies with body size, sex, genetics, and food. While that clearing happens, byproducts like acetaldehyde circulate, and researchers link them to lighter, more broken sleep. The evidence on exact mechanisms is still developing, so scientists describe associations more than certainties. What stays consistent is the timing. The more alcohol still in you at bedtime, the more your later sleep tends to pay for the earlier calm. You might recall drifting off unusually fast after wine, quicker than on a sober night. That quick descent is real, and sleep researchers have measured it. Alcohol tends to shorten how long it takes to fall asleep, an effect called reduced sleep latency. It works because alcohol enhances a calming brain chemical, GABA, that quiets neural activity. For a little while, this feels like relief. The racing thoughts soften, the body loosens. But the same studies note, this benefit fades as the night goes on and the alcohol clears. So the speed of falling asleep is not the whole story. It is only the opening chapter, and the later chapters read very differently. The first stretch of wine-assisted sleep can feel unusually deep, almost heavy, and there is a reason for that weight. Early in the night, alcohol tends to increase slow-wave sleep, the deep, restorative stage where the body does much of its physical recovery. For the first few hours, this can look like better sleep on a chart. But researchers are careful here. This front-loaded deep sleep appears to come at a cost paid later when the body compensates. The evidence suggests a kind of rebalancing rather than a net gain. So that heavy, dreamless opening is not extra rest. It is borrowed rest, drawn forward from hours that will feel emptier by comparison. Perhaps you have gone to bed after wine and simply not remembered dreaming, as if the night went blank. There may be a reason for that quiet. Alcohol tends to suppress REM sleep in the first half of the night, the stage most associated with vivid dreaming and emotional processing. With less REM early on, dreams grow sparse, and the mind's overnight sorting slows. Researchers describe this suppression consistently, though how much it matters for daily life is still debated. What we can say gently is this: the dreamlessness you noticed was not deeper rest. It was one of sleep's quieter tasks, being set aside for a while. You might have felt the night split in two, a calm beginning and a restless end, without knowing why. Sleep scientists describe alcohol's signature as exactly this two-part shape. In the first half, sedation and deep sleep dominate. In the second half, as the alcohol leaves your system, the suppressed REM often returns in a surge called REM rebound, and sleep becomes lighter and more broken. This is why the same night can feel both heavy and fragile. The research here is fairly consistent across studies, even if the intensity differs by person. Your body was not failing. It was simply moving through two very different halves of one night. Maybe you've blamed yourself for waking around 3 in the morning, certain it was stress or a busy mind. Often the timing tells a different story. That early morning waking tends to line up with the moment alcohol has mostly cleared and the brain's activity rebounds. As sedation lifts, the nervous system can swing toward more alertness than usual, and light sleep makes waking easier. Researchers have observed this pattern, though they note individual differences are large, so the 3 a.m. eyes open moment may not be a personal failing at all. It may simply be your body reaching the far edge of the wine's calm and stepping past it. Soon after wine, you can feel oddly warm and drowsy, your skin flushed and heavy. That warmth is part of the story too. Alcohol widens blood vessels near the skin, which makes you feel warm even as it can nudge your core temperature downward. Since a gentle drop in core temperature normally helps sleep begin, this can add to that early drowsiness. But the same shift may work against you later, as your body's temperature rhythm gets subtly disturbed through the night. The evidence on temperature effects is modest and still being explored. What you felt was real, a warmth that welcomed sleep in, then quietly complicated it. Perhaps you have noticed you snored more or slept more shallowly on nights after drinking. Partners often notice it before we do. Alcohol relaxes the muscles of the throat and airway, which can make breathing during sleep noisier and less steady. For some people, especially those already prone to it, this can worsen brief pauses in breathing and lead to more micro-awakenings you never fully remember. Researchers treat this as a real but variable effect, stronger in some bodies than others. So the shallower, noisier sleep was not imagination. It was soft tissue doing what alcohol relaxes it to do, loosening the very passages that quiet, steady breathing depends on. You might have woken thirsty, mouth dry, having to visit the bathroom more than a sober night would ask. That familiar experience points to alcohol's diuretic effect. Alcohol suppresses a hormone called vasopressin that normally helps your kidneys hold onto water, so you produce more urine and lose fluid overnight. The result is dehydration and interrupted sleep from needing to get up. This mechanism is well described, though how strongly it hits varies with the amount and the person. So the broken sleep was partly plumbing, not just chemistry. Your body was simply keeping less water than usual and asking you to rise while it sorted the balance. Maybe you have leaned on wine specifically because your mind would not slow down at night. That reach for relief is deeply human, and researchers understand why it can become a habit. Because alcohol reliably shortens the wait to sleep, the brain learns the association quickly: pour, relax, drift off. The trouble, studies suggest, is that tolerance can build, so the same amount does less over time, and stopping can leave sleep feeling worse for a while. The evidence on dependence patterns is clearer than the evidence on nightly harm, so this is worth holding gently. The comfort was real. It simply came with a loop that tightens quietly. You may have assumed a nightcap and a glass with dinner do the same thing to your sleep. Timing, it turns out, changes the picture. Drinking closer to bedtime leaves more alcohol in your system as you try to sleep, so the fragmentation tends to land harder. A glass earlier in the evening gives your body more hours to clear it before you lie down. Researchers who study drink timing find this spacing meaningfully softens the later disruption, though the studies are modest and individual bodies differ. So it was never only what you drank. It was also when, how much runway your body had before the night began. Perhaps you have wondered whether it is the wine specifically or alcohol in general that unsettles your sleep. The honest answer leans toward the alcohol. Most sleep research points to ethanol, the alcohol itself, as the main driver of the two-part night, rather than anything unique to wine, beer, or spirits. Compounds in red wine draw curiosity, but evidence that they meaningfully change your sleep is limited and mixed. So the romantic idea that a particular glass carries special rest is not well supported. What your sleep responds to is mostly the dose of alcohol and the timing, whatever elegant form that alcohol happens to arrive in. And so the shape becomes hard to miss. Nearly everything we have traced tonight bends toward the same quiet truth. The wine is not simply helping or harming, it is trading. It trades a faster, calmer beginning for a lighter, more broken end. What began as a question about why a sleepy glass leaves you awake at 3 is turning into something gentler and more useful, not whether wine works, but what it borrows, and from which part of the night. The evidence, small and mixed as much of it is, keeps pointing that way. The hours ahead follow that trade further, toward what your body is really asking for beneath the ritual. A glass of wine hits you harder on some nights than others, even when it is the same bottle and the same pour. Researchers who study alcohol metabolism suggest this is not your imagination and not weakness. How quickly wine reaches your bloodstream depends on whether you ate, how tired you already were, and even where you are in your own daily rhythm. On an empty stomach, alcohol crosses into the blood faster, and the early drowsiness arrives sooner. On a full stomach, the same glass unfolds more slowly. The wine did not change, the body receiving it did. What felt inconsistent was simply a system responding to the particular shape of that evening. There may have been nights when one glass left you groggy and other nights when it barely touched you, and you quietly wondered which version was the real you. The honest answer from sleep science is that both were, because tolerance is not a fixed trait, but a moving one. When alcohol is consumed regularly, the body begins adjusting the systems it uses to process it, and the sedating pull can feel weaker over time. Studies here are limited and vary from person to person, so no single number describes everyone. Still, the pattern researchers describe is gentle and clear enough. The habit reshapes the response slowly, without ever announcing that it has done so. Perhaps you have blamed yourself for waking at 3 in the morning, as though your restlessness were a personal failing rather than something happening to almost everyone who drinks before bed. Sleep researchers describe this second-half disruption as one of the most consistent findings in the whole field, small in size but steady in appearance. As the body clears the alcohol, the early sedation lifts and often overshoots, leaving the brain lighter and more easily stirred. This is sometimes called a rebound effect, and it tends to land in the back half of the night. You were not doing anything wrong. Your brain was simply moving through the second act of a story the first glass had already written. If you have ever felt more tender or tearful the day after drinking, and assumed it was only the mood you carried in, there may be a quieter mechanism underneath. The stretch of sleep richest in dreaming, known as REM, is where much of the mind's emotional sorting seems to happen. Alcohol appears to press this stage down in the first half of the night, and evidence suggests the brain sometimes tries to make up the difference later, in more crowded bursts. The research here is still developing, and the effects look modest. But the thread is worth noticing. What you felt the next morning may have begun in the hours your dreaming was quietly rearranged. You might recognize the particular thirst that pulls you awake and sends you toward the kitchen tap in the dark. Wine is mildly diuretic, meaning it nudges the body to release more fluid than usual, and that gentle draining can surface as dryness in the small hours. Sleep medicine treats this as a minor and ordinary effect, not a cause for worry, though it can add one more reason. The second half of the night feels broken. The volume matters more than the presence. A single glass with water alongside behaves very differently than several without. What woke you may have been nothing alarming at all, only your body asking for the water the evening quietly borrowed. There may be a version of you that sleeps beside someone whose snoring seemed to arrive out of nowhere on wine nights, or who notice the same in themselves. Researchers have observed that alcohol relaxes the muscles of the throat and airway, and in some people, this makes breathing during sleep a little less smooth. For most, the effect is slight and passes without consequence. For those already prone to interrupted breathing, evidence suggests it can deepen the pattern somewhat, though studies are careful not to overstate it. This is not a warning so much as a small honesty. The relaxation you feel spreading through your body reaches even the quiet muscles you never think about. Sometimes you pour that evening glass, hoping it will carry you gently into rest, then feel puzzled when rest comes fast, but leaves early. What sleep researchers describe is a kind of trade the body makes without asking. The front of the night arrives easier, deeper in its earliest stretch, while the back of the night pays it back with lighter, more broken sleep. The total hours may look similar on paper. The shape underneath them is what shifts. Scientists are honest that the size of this trade varies widely and is often smaller than the stories we tell about it. Still, the outline holds. Something given early is quietly reclaimed before morning. Perhaps you have wondered whether the calm you feel with wine comes from the drink itself or from everything wrapped around it: the pause, the dimmed light, the signal that the day is finally closing. Researchers who study expectation suggest the ritual carries real weight, sometimes more than the substance. Much of what soothes us at night lives in the pattern rather than the pour. A warm cup, a familiar chair, and a slow exhale can move the body toward rest through habit alone. The comfort was never fully in the glass. It was partly in the moment you gave yourself permission to stop, a permission you can offer with or without it. You might have set the whole question down by now, deciding it is simpler not to think about what one glass does. That instinct is gentle and worth honoring, because none of this is a verdict on your evenings. Science here is modest, the effects often small, and the honest researchers are the first to say the picture is mixed rather than settled. What the evidence gathers toward is not judgment, but understanding. Knowing that the sedation is real and the second half is fragile does not ask you to change anything tonight. It only offers a quieter relationship with your own habit, one built on how the body actually works, rather than on hope or blame. So if wine makes you sleepy, why do you wake at 3 in the morning? By now, the question has quietly turned in your hands. It was never really about whether wine helps or hurts, because the answer to that is small and mixed and personal. The turn is this. The glass gives you the beginning of sleep and slowly takes back the middle. And everything you felt at 3 in the morning was the body honestly balancing a ledger. It opened at dinner. You were not broken, and you were not doing it wrong. You were simply awake inside a mechanism, and understanding it changes nothing you have to do, only how gently you can hold what happens next. What just settled that the waking at 3 was never a failing but a balancing, the body quietly returning what the evening borrowed, is not only a fact about wine. It may be something you have carried for years without a name, blaming yourself for a rhythm that was never yours to fix. Notice where that old blame tends to sit in you, maybe the chest, maybe the jaw, and let it soften a little rather than resolve. The second half of tonight follows this deeper, past the mechanism and toward the ease underneath it. Let your breathing lengthen on its own. There is nothing here to solve, only more to understand. Let's keep moving, slowly, into what comes next. You may have wondered why the wine feels like it works, even on nights it clearly does not. What sleep researchers describe is a split between how quickly you fall asleep and how well you stay asleep. Two things. The body measures separately. Alcohol tends to shorten the time it takes to drift off, and that early speed, is what memory holds on to. The waking at 3 happens later, in a part of the night you rarely remember. So the ritual gets credit for the beginning, and the fragmentation in the second half slips by unaccounted for. The habit made sense because you were only measuring the front of the night. There is a specific reason. The first half of the night felt deep, and the second half felt thin. Researchers observe that alcohol front-loads slow-wave sleep, the deepest stage, into the early hours after drinking. As the body clears the alcohol, that deep sleep does not simply continue. The second half of the night often becomes lighter and more broken, with more brief awakenings. The evidence here is fairly consistent, though the size of the shift varies from person to person. What this means is that the night was never uniform. You were resting in 2 different nights, stitched together, and only one of them belonged to the wine. If you have ever felt that a nightcap and a full night's sleep were somehow at odds, the biology quietly agrees. As the liver breaks alcohol down, one of the byproducts is a compound that researchers associate with lighter, more restless sleep. The concentration rises during the very hours the body is trying to descend into its deepest rest. Studies on this are still relatively small, so the exact mechanism is described with some caution. But the pattern holds. The substance that helped you fall asleep becomes, through its own breakdown, part of what keeps waking you. The habit was working against itself the whole time. You might have noticed that the dreams either vanish or come back too vividly near dawn. What the research points to is REM sleep, the dreaming stage, being suppressed in the first part of the night after drinking, then rebounding later. This rebound is sometimes described as REM pressure building up while it was held back and releasing all at once toward morning. The evidence for the rebound is mixed and depends on how much was consumed. Still, it offers a gentle explanation for those strange, crowded dreams near sunrise. The dreaming was not broken. It was simply delayed, then arriving all at once. There is a quiet logic to why the waking feels so alert rather than drowsy. As alcohol leaves the system, researchers describe a mild rebound in the body's stress signaling, a slight rise in the chemistry that keeps us watchful. Heart rate can edge up, and the nervous system shifts toward a more activated state late in the night. The effect is small and does not happen every time, and the science is still being refined. But it helps explain the quality of that 3 a.m. waking, not sluggish, but oddly awake. The body was not resting. It was recovering from the sedative it had been given. There is a way wine can dry you out that water afterward never quite fixes. Alcohol has a diuretic effect, meaning it prompts the kidneys to release more fluid than usual. Researchers link this to a temporary drop in a hormone that normally tells the body to hold water at night. The result can be a fuller bladder and a mouth gone dry, both of which surface most often in those early morning hours. The effect is modest with a single glass and grows with more. So part of what wakes you is simply the plumbing, a small, ordinary interruption. The wine set in motion hours earlier. If you've ever wondered why 1 glass seems fine while 2 changes everything, the pattern researchers describe is roughly dose-dependent. Low amounts of alcohol tend to disturb sleep only slightly, while moderate to higher amounts more reliably fragment the second half of the night. The word researchers use is caution here, because individual sensitivity varies widely. Body size, tolerance, and timing all shift the outcome. There is no single threshold that fits everyone. What this suggests is not a rule to follow, but a dial to notice. Your own night has been quietly recording where your particular line sits, long before anyone measured it. You might recognize the feeling of sleeping longer, yet waking less rested. Studies that measure sleep quality, not just quantity, find that alcohol can lengthen time in bed while lowering the sense of restoration the next day. The deep sleep came early and then thinned. The dreaming was pushed to the edges. So the hours added up, but the architecture underneath them was uneven. Researchers are careful to note these effects are often small and fade as the body adjusts over nights without drinking. The tiredness you carried was not imagined. The night simply gave you duration without giving you the shape that makes duration feel like rest. There is a reason the effect seems stronger on some nights than others, even with the same glass. Timing matters. Researchers find that alcohol closer to bedtime tends to disrupt the second half of sleep more than alcohol several hours earlier. The body needs time to metabolize it, and when that clearing overlaps with your deepest sleep, the fragmentation is more pronounced. This is described as a tendency, not a certainty, since metabolism differs from person to person. What it offers is a softer way to understand an inconsistent habit. The wine was never the only variable. The clock was quietly shaping every outcome alongside it. It is easy to assume that tolerance means the wine no longer touches your sleep. Researchers describe something more complicated, that regular drinkers can stop feeling the sedation while the sleep disruption continues underneath. The conscious grogginess fades with habit, but the fragmentation in the second half of the night does not always fade with it. The studies here are limited and the picture is still forming, but the implication is gentle rather than accusatory. Tolerance may have quieted what you noticed, without quieting what was happening. The night kept its own record, even on the evenings you felt nothing at all. If you have ever felt that the trouble was really about the day and not the drink, there is something true in that. Researchers point out that stress, caffeine, screen light, and irregular schedules all fragment sleep on their own, and alcohol simply adds to whatever is already there. It rarely acts alone. This makes the effect hard to isolate and easy to misattribute in either direction. What this means is that the wine is one thread in a larger weave, not the whole cloth. Understanding your own habit means seeing it in context as one of several quiet influences, none of them a verdict on you. You might have noticed that the same glass affects you differently than it affects someone you live with. Researchers find that genetics shapes how quickly alcohol is metabolized, and that speed influences how much it disturbs sleep. Some people clear it fast, others hold it longer, and the byproducts linger into the deep hours. This variation is well documented, though the sleep-specific piece is studied in smaller groups. The takeaway is not comparison, but recognition. Your body's response was never a matter of willpower or discipline. It was, in part, an inheritance, a particular chemistry doing exactly what it was built to do on its own timeline. There is a reason afternoon or evening drinking can shadow a night's sleep more than you would expect. Researchers describe alcohol's effects lingering well beyond the point where you feel sober, because metabolism and its byproducts continue for hours. The feeling of clarity returns long before the body finishes its work, so a glass with dinner can still be present chemically when your deepest sleep arrives. The evidence supports the general pattern, though exact durations vary. This offers a kinder frame for the nights that puzzled you. The disruption was not random. It was often the slow tale of something that felt finished hours before you lay down. You may have wondered whether age changed how the wine sat with you. Researchers observe that sleep naturally grows lighter and more fragmented as we get older, with less deep sleep and more brief awakenings, even without any alcohol. When drinking is added, it tends to amplify a fragility that was already there. The studies are consistent on aging, though the interaction with alcohol is described with some care. What this means is that the shift you felt was partly the wine and partly the years moving together. Neither is a failing. Both are simply the body changing and the habit meeting it where it now stands. What has been forming across these hours is quieter than a warning and closer to a description. The question was, why wine makes you sleepy, yet leaves you awake at 3? And the answer is turning out to be a matter of 2 halves rather than one effect. The sedation is real and early. The fragmentation is real and late. And the diuretic pull sits underneath both. None of it is a moral fact about you. The evidence, for all its small studies, keeps pointing the same way, toward a habit that gives with one hand in the first hours and quietly takes with the other before dawn. You might have felt guilty for reaching for the glass, as though the wanting itself were the problem. Researchers who study habit describe the pull as largely ritual, the dimmed lights, the warmth, the signal that the day is done. Much of the comfort lives in the expectation and the routine, not only in the alcohol. Some studies even find that people expecting a relaxing drink feel relaxed before the chemistry could possibly act. The evidence for this expectation effect is suggestive rather than settled, but it softens the story. What you were reaching for may have been the ending of the day, more than the substance itself. There is a reason a non-alcoholic version of the same ritual can carry unexpected weight. Because so much of the wind down lives in the routine, researchers note that the shape of the habit, the glass, the pause, the sitting down, can hold value on its own. This does not mean the alcohol did nothing. It means the alcohol was never doing all of it. The research on ritual and sleep is still modest and should not be overstated. Yet it opens a gentler possibility. The comfort you found was partly something you built night after night, and something you built can be kept even as its contents change. The difference often shows most clearly on the mornings after a night without any wine at all. Researchers who track people across drinking and non-drinking nights often find deeper, more continuous sleep on the alcohol-free nights, especially in the second half. The effect is not large for everyone, and some notice very little, but for many, the second half of the night knits back together when the wine is absent. This is described carefully, since expectation and other habits cloud the comparison. Still, your own body may have been running this experiment quietly for years, keeping a record only it could read. If you have ever felt that cutting back should have fixed everything overnight, the biology asks for a little patience. Researchers describe a short adjustment period after reducing alcohol, where sleep can briefly feel more restless before it settles. The dreaming may return more intensely as REM finds its old rhythm. This rebound is usually mild and temporary, and the studies tracking it are small. What it means is that the first few nights are not the verdict. The body is recalibrating, not rejecting the change. The unsettledness you felt was often the sound of something realigning, not the proof that nothing would. You might have assumed that if the wine relaxed your mind, it would have relaxed your body too. Researchers describe a curious split. Alcohol can quiet the racing thoughts, while the autonomic nervous system, the part that governs heart rate and alertness, grows more active later in the night. The mind eases while the body stirs. This mismatch is part of why the sleep can feel both easy to enter and hard to hold. The measurements supporting this are consistent, though modest in scale. It reframes the whole experience gently. The relaxation was genuine, but it was only ever half of you. The other half was quietly waking. There is a reason the science keeps using words like limited, mixed, and modest. Sleep is difficult to measure, Alcohol interacts with countless other habits, and people differ enormously. Researchers are honest that many studies are small, and that the effects, while real, are often smaller than headlines suggest. This honesty matters more than a bolder claim would. It means the truth here is proportionate. Wine disturbs sleep in describable ways, without ruining it beyond repair or being harmless. Understanding your own habit does not require certainty about every mechanism. It only asks that you hold the pattern loosely, the way the evidence itself is held. You may have wanted a single number to tell you what was safe. The research resists that, and its resistance is itself informative. Rather than a threshold, studies describe gradients. Less alcohol, earlier in the evening, tends to disturb sleep, less than more alcohol, later. Everything else is individual. This is not evasion, it is accuracy. Bodies do not run on universal cutoffs. What this offers is permission to observe rather than obey, to notice how a given night sits with you, and to let that quiet data guide you more than any borrowed rule ever could. Your night has been the most honest study all along. If you have ever felt that knowing all this should change the craving immediately, the mind rarely works that fast. Researchers who study behavior describe understanding and habit as living on different timelines. Insight arrives quickly, while the pattern loosens slowly. This is not a flaw in you, it is simply how habits are built and unbuilt. The evidence on changing sleep habits points toward gradual shifts rather than sudden reversals. So the gap between what you now know and what you still do is expected, not shameful. Knowledge is the first thread. The loosening comes after, gently, on a schedule the body sets rather than the mind. You might have carried a small worry that the habit said something unflattering about you. What the science actually describes is far more ordinary. A common substance meeting, a common nervous system, producing effects that are measurable, modest, and shared by millions. There is nothing exceptional or damning in it. The 3 a.m. waking is not a personal failing. It is chemistry keeping a predictable appointment. Researchers frame these effects as physiological, not moral, and that framing is the most accurate one. The relief in that is quiet but real. You were simply a body doing what bodies do with what they are given. Here is what the night has been assembling, piece by careful piece. Wine sedates you early and fragments you late. It front-loads deep sleep and then thins the second half. It suppresses dreaming, then lets it rebound. And beneath all of it, the diuretic pull adds one more small interruption before dawn. The evidence is honest about its limits, describing effects that are real, yet often modest and deeply individual. This is the shape of the answer, not that wine steals your sleep, but that it reorganizes it, trading an easier beginning for an unsettled end. Understanding this asks only that you see the habit clearly and without judgment. The alcohol you may have had on other nights leaves the body on a schedule no one has to set. The liver working steadily, hour by hour, whether or not anyone is watching. Tonight there is nothing to clear, and the second half of your night belongs to you again, unbroken. What has been gathering across these hours is simple. The waking was never a verdict, only chemistry keeping time. You can let that settle where it needs to. Nothing here asks for effort, and the deep part of the night is already moving toward you. What we have been circling is nearly in reach. You may have noticed that the nights you drink, sleep feels less like a place you go and more like a thing that happens to you. Sleep researchers describe alcohol as a sedative, not a sleep aid, and the difference matters more than it sounds. A sedative pushes the brain down. Real sleep lets it fall on its own. The evidence is fairly consistent. The two feel similar at the door, then part ways in the dark. What you felt was the difference between being lowered and letting go. There is a quiet honesty in admitting that the glass was never really about the sleep. Researchers who study drinking habits suggest that for many people, the wine marks the end of the day more than it changes the night. The signal it sends is real even when the chemistry is small. Studies here are mostly surveys, so they lean soft, describing patterns rather than proving them. Still, the pattern holds. The ritual carried more weight than the substance ever did. Perhaps you have felt the way the second half of one of those nights seems to belong to someone else, thinner, more awake, harder to hold. Sleep medicine has a plain name for this: rebound. As the alcohol clears, the brain overcorrects, and the deep quiet of the early hours gives way to a lighter, restless kind of sleep. The measurements are quiet, but they point the same way. That stranger in the second half was only your own brain, waking back up. You might have wondered why the wine that softened everything at 10 felt like it had abandoned you by 3. What we now know is that the body clears alcohol at a steady pace, and once it is gone, the calm it lent goes with it. There is nothing left to hold the deeper hours together. The science on timing is fairly firm, even where the effects stay small. The softness didn't betray you. It simply ran out, the way borrowed things do. Maybe you have noticed that the glass helps least on the nights you reach for it most. Researchers describe tolerance, the way the same amount does less over time until the sedation fades, but the fragmentation stays. The trade quietly gets worse. Evidence here comes from small studies and is best held loosely, but the direction is steady. What began as help slowly became habit, and the habit kept asking without giving back. There is a particular thirst that finds you in the middle of these nights, a dryness that pulls you halfway awake. Sleep medicine points to alcohol's diuretic effect. It tells the body to release more water, and the fuller bladder and dry mouth surface just as the sleep is already thinning. These effects are well described, though how much they cost your rest varies from person to person. The thirst was real. It was your body, quietly asking for what the evening took. It is easy to tell yourself the drink was helping, even as the mornings say otherwise. What researchers gently point out is that the memory of falling asleep quickly can outweigh the memory of a broken night. The mind keeps the easy part and forgets the rest. This is more observation than hard proof, so hold it lightly. But it explains something kind. You weren't fooling yourself. You were simply remembering the moment that felt like relief. Perhaps you have felt a small guilt in the glass, as though the habit itself were the failing. Studies on drinking and sleep rarely support that weight. Most describe an effect that is slight, uneven, and deeply human, a small nudge, not a sentence. The honesty here is in the smallness. There was never a verdict hiding in the wine, only a mechanism doing what mechanisms do, quietly and without judgment. You might notice how much of the effect lives in expectation, the way the evening softens the moment you decide it will. Researchers have found that what we believe a drink will do shapes a real part of what we feel. The mind meets the glass halfway. This work is still limited and easy to overstate, so it stays a suggestion. But it points somewhere gentle. Some of the comfort was always yours, waiting for permission to arrive. There is a version of these nights when nothing goes wrong, and you sleep as if the glass never happened. Sleep scientists would tell you that response varies widely. Age, dose, timing, and body all bend the outcome, and no single rule fits everyone. The evidence is a range, not a verdict. That variation is worth remembering. Your night was never a failure to match a chart. It was your own body, answering in its own way. Maybe you have felt the difference between a night with 1 glass and a night with 3, even when the numbers looked close. Researchers describe a rough dose relationship. More alcohol tends to mean more fragmentation later, though the line is far from exact. The findings are consistent in direction, if soft in detail. What you sensed in your body was quietly accurate. The amount mattered, even on the nights you told yourself it wouldn't. You may have noticed the wine feels heaviest when it lands close to sleep. Sleep medicine suggests that timing shapes much of the effect. A drink hours before bed clears more gently than one taken as the light goes out. The evidence here is limited and mostly about patterns, not promises. But it offers something forgiving. The trouble was rarely the glass alone. It was how near it sat to the door of the night. There is a stillness available now that asks nothing of you. You just heard how much of the wine's comfort lived in ritual and expectation, in the meaning you gave it, more than the molecule itself. Notice where that lands in your body tonight, the small loosening in the chest that comes when a habit stops feeling like a fault. There's nothing to solve here right now. Let the understanding settle where it wants to. The quiet part of the night follows this, gently, on its own. You might have wondered whether the answer was simply to stop, as if there were a clean fix waiting. What researchers offer instead is something softer: awareness, timing, the slow relationship between you and a habit, changing at whatever pace it changes. The science rarely prescribes. It mostly describes and leaves the choosing to you. There was no failure to correct here, only a pattern to see clearly and to hold with a little more kindness. The night has been showing this, quietly, glass by glass. The wine sedates you fast and then loosens its hold in the dark hours, breaking the deeper rest and drying the body just as the sleep grows thin. That is the whole mechanism, small and honest. What heals or unsettles these nights was never a verdict on you. It was chemistry, arriving on time and leaving on time, doing exactly what it does, nothing more, nothing you had to earn or deserve. Perhaps you have carried the sense that understanding the habit meant judging it. The research keeps declining that invitation. It names the mechanism and stops there, without a lecture, without a cure to sell. The tone of the science is plainer than we expect. What you were looking for was never absolution. It was only to know what was happening, and now, softly, you do. It is strange to feel how something so small could shape a whole night. Sleep scientists would remind you the effect is real but slight, a nudge in the chemistry, not a storm. The measurements stay quiet even when the mornings feel loud. There is relief in that proportion. The night was never as broken as it seemed at 3. It was a small thing, honestly described, and now held to its true size. There is a softness in learning that the glass was mostly a way of marking rest, not making it. Researchers suggest the ritual, the pause, the pouring, the settling may carry more of the comfort than the alcohol ever did. That part of the science is gentle and unfinished, but it leaves something whole. The wish underneath the habit was always simple. You only wanted a way to tell the day it was allowed to end. You might notice how the understanding changes the wine without accusing it. Knowing that it sedates and then fragments doesn't make the glass an enemy. It only makes it clearer, a small trade, seen honestly, held without shame. The science here is understated by design. And in that restraint, there is room to breathe. Nothing about tonight requires a decision. Some things only ask to be understood, and then let go. Perhaps you have felt tired of watching your own habits from a distance, as if from the outside. Tonight was a way of coming close, not to fix the pattern, but to sit beside it. Researchers rarely offer more than that, and rarely does more feel called for. Understanding is its own quiet kind of rest. You didn't come here to be corrected. You came to see clearly, and clearness, it turns out, is soft. There is a particular peace in no longer needing the wine to explain the tiredness. What the night showed is that the broken hours had a cause, a small and ordinary one, and that you were reading your own body correctly all along. The science only confirmed it. That confirmation asks nothing back. You were never confused about your own nights. You simply hadn't been told the name of what you already felt. You may notice the weight of the question loosening now, the one about why sleep and the glass never quite kept their promise to each other. The answer turned out to be kind. It was chemistry and timing, not character. Nothing you had to defend. The knowing settles like a hand set gently down. Whatever you choose next can wait for the morning. Tonight, the understanding is enough. Perhaps the softest thing tonight is realizing you never had to earn a good night by getting the habit perfectly right. Rest was never a reward for solving yourself. The science pointed only at a mechanism, patient and impersonal, and left the rest to be simply lived. You can set down the accounting now. The night ahead asks for nothing you haven't already given. You might feel, at this hour, how little judgment the whole thing ever deserved. A glass, a habit, a body doing what bodies do, described, not condemned. That was all it ever was. The kindness was in the clarity. And clarity, held long enough, becomes a kind of quiet. There is nothing left to understand tonight. There is only the settling that comes after understanding. What you really wanted was never the wine, and never the answer either. It was to feel that your own tired evenings made sense, that the way you reached for rest was human and forgivable and yours. Tonight you can let the glass be a small thing again. You were never failing at sleep. You were only looking for a way to be allowed to stop, and tonight, softly, you are. Wine finds its own level in a glass, settling until it goes perfectly still, asking nothing of the hand that poured it. Let that same settling move through you now. Everything the evening stirred up, the questions, the small guilt, the reaching, is drifting toward the bottom, going quiet, finding its level in the dark. There was never a condition on this rest. Nothing to get right first, nothing to earn. Let your whole self dissolve into the soft weight of a night that has finally stopped asking anything of you. The glass was only ever a way of telling the day it was allowed to end. That doesn't make the broken nights smaller, but it makes them different, because now they have a shape you can see, a chemistry that comes and goes on its own clock, indifferent and honest, never once a comment on who you are. You leave tonight knowing the wine for what it is. Not a cure, not a failing, a small thing, a quiet one, doing its patient work in the dark hours, sedating early, loosening late, drying the body as the sleep grows thin. And knowing that changes something. Not because the habit has to change, but because you can meet it now without the old weight. Without the sense that a broken night was ever a verdict. You were reading your own body correctly all along. Tonight, at last, you have the name for what you felt, and the name is gentle. The food science, facts to fall asleep. To Playlist has been returning to this same tender question from many directions, the quiet gap between what we reach for and what our bodies actually do with it. The next video carries it further, toward the part tonight only pointed at. That video is waiting whenever you are ready. You can allow these thoughts to settle now, the way wine goes still in a glass, no one is holding anymore, finding its own level in the dark. Let your body grow heavy with the ease that comes after understanding something you'd been carrying too long. If sleep comes, let it take you to the part of the night that asks nothing of you, that keeps no account, that was never a reward for getting anything right. If your eyes have already closed, there's nothing left to open them for. Rest well, gentle soul. The habit was never the failing, only a small and human way of asking the day to end. And tonight, it has. Fall gently into the quiet, where understanding becomes the softest place to rest. Start.